As tensions smoldered across the eastern Mediterranean in the early 2nd century BCE, a new challenge to Roman authority emerged, not from Greece or Macedon, but from the vast Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III, often styled the Great. Fresh from campaigns in the east, Antiochus envisioned a restored Hellenistic dominion stretching from the Taurus Mountains to the Aegean. He saw himself as the heir to Alexander's legacy. Rome saw him as a threat to the fragile balance it had just imposed. The war did not erupt suddenly. It was preceded by a dense web of diplomacy, maneuvering, and betrayal. Antiochus's ambitions intersected with Greek unrest, particularly the discontent of the Aetolian League, who had once fought alongside Rome but now resented its dominance. Viewing Antiochus as a liberator, the Aetolians invited him into Greece. This act, though couched in Hellenic language, was a direct challenge to Roman supremacy. Complicating matters was the presence of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general exiled from his homeland, now serving as an advisor at the Seleucid court. Hannibal's influence over Antiochus remains debated, but Mommsen emphasizes its symbolic power. For Rome, the alliance of Hannibal and Antiochus represented not just a diplomatic problem, but a historical reckoning. Their two greatest enemies had found common cause. Rome responded with caution, seeking to defuse the conflict through diplomacy. Envoys were dispatched to Antiochus and to the Greek cities. Offers were made, guarantees of autonomy, warnings of overreach, demands that Antiochus withdraw from Europe. These negotiations failed. Antiochus, perhaps overconfident in his power and alliances, dismissed Rome's ultimatums. The result was war, a conflict not just over territory, but over the structure of Mediterranean power. Antiochus had crossed into Greece not with overwhelming force, but with the assumption that Rome would hesitate to fight another Eastern war so soon after Macedon. But he misjudged both Roman resolve and Roman preparation. The Republic, far from overstretched, was now experienced in projecting power and rallying allied support. Mommsen interprets the prelude to war not as the reckless ambition of an Eastern monarch, but as the inevitable friction between two political systems expanding toward each other's spheres. Rome could no longer afford ambiguity in its eastern frontier. Antiochus could not accept the decline of Seleucid influence without resistance. Thus, the final confrontation between republic and monarchy was set into motion, not by a single act, but by years of converging ambitions, misread intentions, and the lingering presence of figures like Hannibal who personified unresolved conflict. When Antiochus III landed in Greece with his forces in 192 BCE, he expected to rally broad support among the Greek states. The Aetolian League, aggrieved by Rome's growing dominance, welcomed him as a liberator. But the grand coalition Antiochus envisioned failed to materialize. Most Greek states, weary of war and wary of Rome's retribution, remained neutral or actively sided with the Republic. Antiochus had overestimated the reach of anti-Roman sentiment and underestimated the depth of Roman influence. Rome acted swiftly. The Senate dispatched legions under the consul Manius Acilius Glabrio, accompanied by experienced commanders and contingents from Greek allies such as the Achaeans and Thessalians. The campaign in Greece was more than a military operation. It was a display of Rome's capacity to project organized and multi-ethnic force on foreign soil, combining Roman discipline with local cooperation. The decisive engagement came at Thermopylae, the storied pass once held by Leonidas and his Spartans. Antiochus, confident in the narrow terrain, entrenched his army there in hopes of halting the Roman advance. But this ancient strategy proved inadequate against Rome's flexible tactics. Roman engineers and scouts identified the high ground, just as the Persians had centuries before. A flanking maneuver routed the Seleucid positions, forcing Antiochus into a full retreat. Mommsen emphasizes the symbolic and strategic dimensions of this victory. Thermopylae, once a site of resistance to foreign domination, now marked the reaffirmation of Roman supremacy in Greece. Antiochus's withdrawal shattered his authority in the region and exposed the hollowness of his Greek alliance. His failure to coordinate effectively with the Aetolians and to secure additional support from Macedon or Central Greece revealed the limitations of Seleucid power west of Asia Minor. The implications were immediate. Antiochus retreated across the Aegean, abandoning his claims to Greek leadership. The Aetolians, isolated and exposed, prepared for punitive Roman action. The balance of power in Greece was not just restored, but realigned. Rome had defended its hegemony without entrenchment, proving once again that it could defeat the great monarchies of the East while maintaining its republican posture. For Mommsen, the campaign demonstrated how Rome's military professionalism, diplomatic alliances, and strategic patience consistently outmatched the grandstanding of Hellenistic kings. Antiochus had come as a savior and left as a fugitive. Rome, without founding a province or toppling a throne, had reaffirmed its role as the ultimate arbiter of Hellenic affairs. With Antiochus III routed from Greece and his ambitions in the West in collapse, the Roman Republic escalated its response. No longer content with containment, it resolved to carry the war into Asia Minor itself. This decision marked a fundamental turning point. Rome was now taking military initiative beyond the traditional Greek world, targeting the heartland of a Hellenistic empire with the full weight of its legions. Command was entrusted to Lucius Cornelius Scipio, the elected consul for 190 BCE, but the true architect of the campaign was his brother, the celebrated Scipio Africanus, victor of Zama and the man who had broken Hannibal. Though officially serving only as legate, Africanus's strategic insight and political prestige shaped the expedition. The campaign's objective was clear: defeat Antiochus on his own soil and shatter the Seleucid capacity for future challenge. Crossing the Hellespont, the Roman army advanced into Asia Minor with the support of local allies, particularly Pergamum, whose ruler, Eumenes II, provided critical intelligence, supplies, and political legitimacy. Mommsen stresses the importance of these regional coalitions. Rome, once again, avoided acting as a pure conqueror. It presented itself as the defender of smaller Hellenistic states against imperial overreach. Antiochus attempted to muster a final stand. He assembled a large force near Magnesia ad Sipylum, reinforced with war elephants, scythed chariots, and heavy cavalry, hallmarks of the traditional Hellenistic order of battle. In sheer numbers and spectacle, the Seleucid host outmatched the Romans. But as with the phalanx at Cynocephaly, size and grandeur proved no match for Roman organization and tactical adaptability. At the Battle of Magnesia in late 190 BCE, the Seleucid army was decisively defeated. Roman manipular legions, operating with disciplined flexibility, exploited the vulnerabilities in Antiochus's flanks. A failed charge by the Seleucid left collapsed under Roman pressure, and panic spread through the central phalanx. The Elephant Corps, intended as a shock force, became disoriented and turned back into their own ranks. Antiochus fled the field. The Seleucid position in Asia Minor disintegrated overnight. Mommsen interprets this battle not merely as a military triumph, but as a strategic liquidation of the Seleucid threat. It destroyed the last credible military counterweight to Roman supremacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. It also showed that Hellenistic monarchies, despite their wealth and armies, lacked the structural coherence and martial discipline to resist Rome in sustained engagements. The Roman victory at Magnesia had geopolitical consequences on a scale that exceeded even Zama. Carthage had been a Western rival. Antiochus was an Eastern emperor. In defeating him on his own territory, Rome announced its capacity for transcontinental war and its readiness to act as the final arbiter of imperial claims in both East and West. The crushing defeat at Magnesia left Antiochus III in a position of total submission. His ambitions for a renewed Hellenistic empire had collapsed, and now he was forced to negotiate terms not as a sovereign equal, but as a defeated monarch. The result was the Treaty of Apamea, concluded in 188 BCE, one of the most consequential diplomatic acts in the early history of Roman expansion. Rome dictated terms that were punitive, yet tactically restrained. Antiochus was forced to relinquish all territory west of the Taurus Mountains, effectively ceding control of Asia Minor. But instead of annexing this vast region, Rome transferred large portions of it to its allies. Pergamum received significant territorial expansion, as did Rhodes, both of whom had fought beside Rome and acted as essential intermediaries. This distribution confirmed Rome's commitment to hegemony through proxy, avoiding direct rule while ensuring strategic control. Mommsen stresses the calibrated nature of this arrangement. Rome did not desire an Eastern empire in the traditional sense, not yet. What it sought was security, loyalty, and influence, without the burden of direct administration. By strengthening local powers who were dependent on Roman favor, the Republic created a geopolitical buffer zone that extended Roman supremacy while minimizing governance costs. The treaty also disarmed the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus was forbidden to keep war elephants or to sail warships west of the Taurus. He had to surrender 20 hostages, including his own son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and pay an indemnity of 15,000 talents. The Seleucid military machine, once a symbol of imperial grandeur, was thus dismantled under treaty obligations that Rome could enforce at will. Yet perhaps more important than the territorial or military terms was the psychological transformation this treaty embodied. Rome had humbled a monarch who had claimed descent from Alexander's line, and it had done so without proclaiming empire, without establishing satrapies, and without building imperial capitals. The Republic had achieved imperium sine provincia, dominion without direct possession. This model of disempowered sovereignty became a hallmark of Roman diplomacy. Antiochus remained king in name, but his realm was circumscribed, his actions monitored, and his authority subordinated to Roman consent. The Treaty of Apamea thus represented more than the end of a war. It inaugurated a system of hierarchical autonomy, where Rome preserved native thrones as long as they served Roman ends. Mommsen views the treaty as a masterstroke of Roman statecraft. It avoided the liabilities of empire while achieving its results. And it sent a clear signal to the Hellenistic world. Rome would tolerate monarchs, but not rivals. The geopolitical aftershocks of the Treaty of Apamea rippled through the eastern Mediterranean, but one consequence carried symbolic weight far beyond its immediate strategic effect: the final displacement of Hannibal Barca. Long since exiled from Carthage after his defeat at Zama, Hannibal had become a wandering statesman and strategist, a relic of a past order, yet still feared by Rome as the only man who had once brought the Republic to the brink of annihilation. After serving briefly in the court of Antiochus III, Hannibal's role during the Roman-Seleucid conflict had been more emblematic than decisive. His counsel was not fully heeded. Antiochus distrusted the directness of Hannibal's advice and remained hesitant to grant him full command. Nevertheless, his mere presence in the East had disturbed Roman leaders, especially in a period when the memory of the Second Punic War still shaped strategic calculations. Following the Seleucid defeat at Magnesia, and under the terms of the Treaty of Apamea, Antiochus was compelled to surrender foreign advisors, and Rome exerted increasing pressure for Hannibal's extradition. But rather than face capture, Hannibal chose once again to flee, from the court of Artaxias in Armenia to Crete, and finally to Bithynia, where he found temporary refuge. Mommsen treats the pursuit of Hannibal as more than a military epilogue. It symbolizes Rome's emerging insistence on ideological closure. The Republic, though not formally imperial, now demanded control over the very memory of its adversaries. Hannibal, the last living emblem of Carthaginian resistance and pan-Mediterranean opposition, had no place in the new order. Eventually, Roman agents tracked him to Labissa, a coastal town in Bithynia. Surrounded and unwilling to be paraded in triumph through Rome, Hannibal took poison around 183 BC. With his death, the Republic closed a chapter of existential warfare that had defined an entire generation. Rome's enemies had not only been defeated in the field, but erased from political life. Mommsen sees in this episode a key historical threshold: the personal vanishing point of resistance, where individual defiance, however legendary, no longer threatened the Roman order. With Hannibal gone and Antiochus neutered, there remained no significant figure in the east or west who could mobilize a serious challenge to Rome's supremacy. It was not the loss of a general that mattered, but the disappearance of a world in which Rome had equals. What emerged was a unipolar political environment, in which even memory had to conform to the dictates of Roman security and historical legitimacy. With Antiochus III humbled and Hannibal dead, Rome emerged not simply as a victorious republic, but as the architect of a new political order in the eastern Mediterranean. Yet Rome's methods did not resemble those of the monarchies it displaced. It annexed no provinces, created no satrapies, and installed no permanent governors. Instead, as Mommsen underscores, it pursued a system of controlled autonomy, a model wherein native states retained their institutions and rulers, but all operated within a Roman-defined framework of legitimacy. This strategy relied on a network of client kingdoms and allied republics, each bound to Rome through treaties, military obligations, and the implied threat of intervention. Pergamum, under Eumenes II, became the chief recipient of Roman favor in Asia Minor. Rhodes, as a naval ally, was entrusted with oversight of key Aegean coastal regions. In Greece, nominal independence was maintained, but Rome exercised de facto control by arbitrating disputes and suppressing leagues that defied its guidance. Most notably the Aetolian League, which was decisively punished for its earlier alignment with Antiochus. Mommsen emphasizes that this form of dominion was unprecedented in the ancient world. Unlike the empires of Persia or Alexander, Rome governed not by replacing local elites, but by subordinating them without abolishing their authority. Roman power functioned through presence, diplomacy, and expectation, not administrative uniformity. Local rulers issued laws and minted coins, but their sovereignty was conditional, always subject to Roman oversight, always vulnerable to Roman correction. The Republic's military withdrawals after victory reinforced the illusion of independence. But garrisons were stationed at key points, and legates remained on hand to issue recommendations that few dared ignore. Rome's authority was not merely coercive, it was structural. It defined the parameters of acceptable behavior, imposed peace as a function of its will, and positioned itself as the guarantor of civilization against instability. This arrangement brought a measure of peace to the Hellenistic world, but it also inaugurated a new kind of subjugation, one that relied on voluntary deference rather than imposed subjection. As Mommsen notes, it marked the transition from a republic that reacted to threats to one that preemptively ordered the world around it, using limited force to maintain a vastly expanded sphere of influence. What Rome built in these years was a geopolitical scaffolding, not yet empire in the formal sense, but an imperial system in function and effect. Without ruling directly, the Republic had made itself indispensable. It was now the final authority in every serious matter of diplomacy, security, and governance from the Adriatic to the Taurus Mountains. The East was not annexed, it was absorbed. The final movement of Chapter 6, as developed by Mommsen, returns to a central and unsettling question. What had the Roman Republic become? Through successive wars against Philip, Antiochus, and the fractious Greek leagues, Rome had achieved supremacy without explicitly seeking empire. But the very tools it had used to avoid formal domination, alliances, protectorates, military withdrawals, had in fact constructed a system of informal rule more enduring and insidious than open conquest. Mommsen identifies this phase as a moment of ideological dissonance. The Roman Senate continued to speak the language of republicanism, of liberating peoples and restoring order. But in practice, its decisions had transformed the Eastern Mediterranean into a Roman-dominated sphere of interest. Legates governed without title, treaties were imposed without negotiation, client kings reigned at Roman pleasure. A structure of power had emerged in which the Republic acted as the guarantor of a political order it now entirely controlled. This system was not only functional, but self-perpetuating. Victories bred expectations, allies became dependents. Rome had to enforce peace to protect its prestige, intervene to maintain balance, and punish disorder to reaffirm its indispensability. In the process, the Republic found itself trapped in a logic of hegemony, unable to retreat without consequence, and unwilling to annex outright. Internally, the effects were equally transformative. Roman commanders returning from the East did so not only with military laurels, but with unprecedented personal prestige and material wealth. Triumphs were celebrated. New aristocratic lines were formed through Eastern patronage. The Senate, while retaining formal control, increasingly depended on individuals whose influence rested not on office alone, but on their global achievements. Mommsen sees in this the seeds of the Republic's long-term instability. Rome had acquired imperial power without creating imperial institutions. It governed through improvisation, prestige, and coercion, but without a system designed to manage permanent overseas supremacy. The contradictions between republican ideology and imperial function would, in time, produce crises the old constitutional forms could not contain. And yet, by the end of the Seleucid conflict, the outcome was undeniable. Rome had become the hegemon of the civilized world. Its authority stretched from the Pillars of Hercules to the Taurus Mountains. It commanded armies, dictated treaties, settled dynastic disputes, and imposed peace on its terms. It was not an empire in name, but in every operational sense, it had already become one. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.